Now, if you don't remember the minimum requirement to play Baldur's Gate 3, here they are. But we're here to go lower than that and try to find out what's the real minimum requirement to play Baldur's Gate 3, meaning 720p, 30 FPS, and smoothly. Just to know how low you can go and what budget PC you can play with. Welcome to Respawn PC, I'm Dunk, let's dive in. I first start with a GTX 660, but I was locked out by the driver, being too old. Then I try out the AMD side, I had the HD 7770, also locked out from a driver. Then when I was ready to try the AMD R9 380, which the driver was okay, and is no more okay after an update of Baldur's Gate. After that I put the GTX 750 Ti on the Intel platform Q8200, and now the CPU is out of date. Missing some microcode for this Yorkfield chip, mean we have to step to the first gen of Intel to start to try. So our step up to the first gen of Intel was the i5 650 with the GTX 750 Ti, 2GB DDR5, 8GB of memory, 720p, low settings. Result? We're under 20, sometimes in the 15, so let's upgrade to the next platform. The next step up for the i5 650 will be the GTX 950, 2GB of DDR5, still at low settings, 720p. Having again the GPU peg at 100% and still getting lower than 20 FPS. This is another failure. We're going to step up again to another card. And I think the CPU is also reaching its limit, getting close to 100%. But let's try a better card and see how the CPU fare. Now, the last test with the i5 650 will be with the GTX 960. And for the VRAM, we upgrade from 2GB to 4GB of VRAM, still at 8GB of system memory and 720p low settings. And in this case, you'll be able to see that we still have a hard time to reach the aim 30 FPS, but we can see the CPU is killing us right now. But we seems to be bottlenecked by the RAM. Let's try 16GB with that setup and see how it goes. And look at that surprise! With 16GB of memory, we're using 9.6, 9.7 compared to the 7.4, and we're reaching over 30 FPS with some dip in the 20s and some high in the 40s. CPU still in the close of the 90s, almost pegged, sometime pegs. Now let's dump that Clarkdale CPU to jump to the Bloomfield, because 16GB is higher than the minimum requirement. But before jumping into the Bloomfield, I just want to try the AMD side of things. It's a whole AMD X6 1045T, still with the GTX 960 and 8GB of memory, 720p low. It was playing smoothly, but I was in the low 20s and in the 10s. So let's forget about this one and really jump to the Bloomfield. The Bloomfield in question is the i7 920, downgrade back to the GTX 950 because more CPU power can lower a bit the GPU. Still 8GB of memory and 720p. I've tried some medium and some low. My FPS was jumping from 14 to 34, really unstable, not really super smooth, but that was in medium. So when I dropped to low, was a bit more stable, was getting FPS between 42 and 26. So if you lock the FPS at 30 FPS, should smooth the things up, and it is. So I think we have a winner. The i7 920, the GTX 950, 8GB of memory, 720p low. If you lock the FPS at 30, it runs smoothly. Now, just for the fun of it, I want to try the GTX 960 with this i7 920 and see how it fares. With the settings set up at the medium, I get the FPS reach sometime at 60 FPS, but I have some drop to the 15 FPS here and there, so it's really unstable. So maybe if you lock the FPS at 45, you have a highly playable system. Because right now, the CPU is often pegged at 100%, 99%, so maybe if we drop everything to low, see how stable it can be. And by doing so, without locking the FPS, we get a more stable FPS. In the i40 to the 25, 26, and also the GPU and the CPU have more room to breathe, not being pegged at 100% at all. I'll say it's also a good choice. I also did a test with the i7 920, but I put a more recent card, the GT 1030, 2GB of DDR5, not the 4 variant. Still 8GB of memory, 720p low, and the FPS lock at 30. And between the CPU and the GPU, playing who's going to stay at 100% and more longer, it's a quite stable 30 FPS. I think we have another winner. Since this Bloomfield platform i7 920 is a really old platform, what if we try out to just max out everything of that platform? It would be quite cheap. It would be a budget PC for Baldur's Gate. So I changed the GPU for a GTX 980 Ti 6GB from AVGA and upgrade the memory for 24GB of DDR3 1600 MHz. And I've kept it at 720p, but ultra settings, and we're reaching the 62 FPS max and the lower in the 40, some 37 here and there, highly playable. So what about if we just put in 1080p and just I instead? And by doing so, we can have some 50 FPS and some 34 FPS. So if you lock the thing up at the 45 FPS or 40 FPS, you can play at the 1080p easily and at I. So the two winner to play Baldur's Gate at 720p low settings at 30 FPS smoothly is the i7-920 paired with the GTX 950 and 8GB of memory. We also have the i5 650 with the GTX 960 and 16GB of memory. Those are really old platform, but if you're on a budget, this will be perfect. The game will cost you almost as much as the system itself, if you don't already have it. And this, keep in mind, was all made with the SSD. The next video will be on the HDD to try to see how it goes, how it fares, or how it crashes. We will test the NVMe, SSD, HDD, USB drive, and will come shortly after this video. Please subscribe if you haven't, and see you on the next one.